POTUS and Elon, and their quest is to get to the moon in the next 2 years, and eventually Mars in 4. Those are pretty lofty goals. I think obviously the moon and whatever happens with the Artemis program, I still think the quest is to get back to the lunar surface. They've got these rockets lined up, ready for testing and developing, and their mentality is fail fast. Let's blow these up. Let's learn from them, make some tweaks and changes, and press on.
Let's go.
Welcome to Citizen. We got a special guest today. I think you're retired. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel, right? You're not, you didn't leave early. You did 20-something years, right? 26, is that right?
No, I did 20.
20, okay.
20
Air Force Lieutenant Colonel and pilot Scott Poteet. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Surviving.
Yeah, getting after it, huh? You said you're up in New Hampshire?
I am, yeah. It's a town called Stratham. We're about an hour north of Boston. There's, if you blink, it's a pretty quick drive from Massachusetts through New Hampshire to Maine. So,
how did you end up there? Is that where you're from?
I was born in Chattanooga, Tennessee, raised North Georgia for the first 6 years, middle to low income. Dad got transferred in his job up here. So I grew up in this town, this area, actually a town called Durham, New Hampshire. And went through elementary, middle, high school, and college all in the same town. And then joined the military.
There you go. What made you decide to join the military?
Oh, man. I grew up in the 80s. I was always a big fan of the original Top Gun. Every kid's inspiration, air shows, and all that stuff. Wasn't until my freshman year in college, it kind of had this serendipitous moment. It was part of the Air Force ROTC program. There was a flyer, it was encouraging students to sign up and be a passenger aboard a KC-135 refueling aircraft. So a local guard unit right down the road. So I was very impulsive as a kid. I signed up, not really knowing the consequences because extremely prone to motion sickness, always have been, scared of heights. And I had never flown in an aircraft before up to that point. But I thought I'd give it a shot and went on this flight, puked my brains out for 2 hours straight. But I had the opportunity to see the fighters get refueled. And that was enough of a spark to go, that's exactly what I want to do with my life, and kind of figure out my own path to get into that point. Joined the ROTC program, did 4 years of that at the university, and then spent 20 years Air Force.
Yeah, I think that I was in the 82nd Airborne. I think that whole fear of heights thing is overrated. Because there's a height that you get to where the fear no longer exists. I think a fear of heights at 20 or 30 feet or 50 is way worse than 2,000, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like when you look down and all you see is like a kind of distant shade of ground. I never got struck by any kind of fear of heights at that point.
To me, it's what I've tried to psychoanalyze is it feels like it's man-made structures. I'm fine climbing mountains. Well, I guess an airplane is a man-made structure, but as far as like buildings and, we went to the top of the tower of Starship's launch complex, and that's like 485 feet. Horrified. I don't know what it is. Eiffel Tower, took the kids there one time. I can't get anywhere near the edge.
Well, luckily it didn't affect your flying because you flew quite a bit. So I'm not too familiar. We've had plenty of pilots on before. Wiz Buckley's a buddy of mine, a couple others, Dale is an A-10 pilot. But walk me through the process for that. So you go through ROTC and you go to the Air Force, so you're going to be an officer. But what made you not what made you, but what was the process like to get accepted into the pilot program? And then you go through. My understanding is that you go through an initial part, and then the aircraft almost gets selected for you based on availability, merit, so on and so forth. Can you explain that whole process?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Needs of the Air Force, needs of the military is what it boils down to. But as far as my progress, it was very non-traditional. Absolute horrible student, C's and D's throughout grade school. One reason why I went to college was I was recruited as an athlete, a runner, ran cross country, indoor and outdoor track at the University of New Hampshire. And when I experienced that whole KC-135 flight, I'm like, I had a goal, and then I had to figure out how to graduate. And being a terrible student, traditional education just wasn't my gig. It wasn't my jam. Sitting in class and taking notes and memorizing and regurgitating it, and maybe you might use that information later in life, maybe not. It just didn't resonate. So I came across a program called outdoor education. And it's more or less education through experiences. You're taught a basic skill set, and you go out in the field immediately, and you start applying these skills, and you learn through those experiences. And this was a very niche program at the university that I went to. And, I spent 4 years scuba diving, rock climbing, winter mountaineering, whitewater rafting, Nordic skiing, and those were my classes. And my primary instructor was a Navy SEAL for 20 years. So that was the only way I was able to graduate. And concurrently, I was doing the ROTC program. Once I declared my major, my ROTC commander was like, "You're going to do what with this degree?" And I said, "I want to be a fighter pilot." And he laughed at me, and he said, "You might want to find a backup game plan." So that only fueled my fire. And eventually I graduated and did well enough as a cadet at the ROTC program that I got selected for pilot training. I went to a program called Euro-NATO Joint Jet Pilot Training. It's in Wichita Falls, Texas, Shepherd Air Force Base, and it's specified for fighter pilots. A lot of the NATO countries will send their students and their instructors to this program. So it's kind of already on this fighter pilot track. But there's 2 or 3 other bases that you can go to, and you kind of compete. And this gets to the second part of your question. It's like when you go there, it's always stratification. It's based on your performance in whatever program you're in. And so you spend the first 6 months in this basic trainer. For me, it was a T-37, just, I would say a low-powered jet aircraft. Spend 6 months in that, and based on your performance in that, you would now take one of 2 tracks. If you were in the traditional program, you would go to a T-38, that whole MiG-27 and Top Gun, the white jet, and NASA still flies them. Or you would go kind of a Learjet track to go to the heavies, the C-130s, C-17s, and C-5s. The program I was in, you immediately go into the T-37, or I'm sorry, the T-38 track. You do that for 6 months. And again, based on how you perform, they stratify you 1 through whatever. And needs of the Air Force, okay, here is your drop, your assignment drop. We have 3 F-16s, we got 2 F-15Cs, 3 F-15Es, a couple A-10s, and maybe a couple instructor positions to go back to teach at pilot training. And you just go down the list. All right, number 1 in the class, pick and you cross it out. And I got an F-16 and went off to fly F-16s. And then you go do that for 6 months. And then now you're about 1.5 years, 2 years into your military career when you first get your operational assignment and you start going to do combat missions. And so I went off to Korea to Italy, got picked up for fighter weapons school, which is the Air Force version of Top Gun. Did that program, and then did some instruction in the F-16. And then I got picked up for the Thunderbirds, did that for a couple of years. And then I commanded an aggressor squadron, the pretty much OP4 unit for the Air Force. And then I finished up in Italy doing combat in Afghanistan on my last assignment.
Was F-16 your first choice, or what would you have chosen? Like, I mean, like at the time, but then also in hindsight, would you have chosen something different, I guess?
No, in hindsight, no, I definitely wouldn't have chose. I had the choice between an F-15C, an F-16, and an A-10. And I chose the F-16 because it was single seat. I didn't want a backseater. And it was a multi-role. So you were going to do air to air, you're going to do air to ground, CAS, interdiction, CSAR. So it was a smattering of all, and it's kind of known as the jack of all trades, master of none, just because you have all these different modalities you kind of got to figure out. And you never really get good like you would like an F-15C. It's all air to air. F-22. That's now the 5th gen replacement of the F-15C. But I wouldn't change a thing. I absolutely love the F-16.
Well, as an infantryman, I love the A-10. Not to pick favorites or anything, but that noise strikes fear in the heart of the enemy. Maybe even more than ordnance being dropped. To be honest, when they hear the BERT sound, it's like people seem to scatter pretty rapidly.
Yeah, that's a very badass aircraft.
Yeah.
Near and dear to your guys' hearts, I'm sure.
Yeah, that and the Apache are two things that have come to my aid a number of times.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I mean, when we're supporting, it's, we're up in the 20s and you can't hear us. And
well, no, I'll say this, the coolest thing that ever happened to me I've told this story before, but with CAS, the coolest thing that ever happened to me was actually from an F-16. So we're raiding this compound, and our ISR is calling up like, hey, there's 2 squirters going out of the back of this house, blah, blah, blah. They're hiding in this house right down the street. And I'm like, dude, you're giving me directions from 3 dimensions and I can only see 2. You got to help me. So he shines the green godlight on my feet and fucking walks me over to the house. I'm like, all right, that was pretty dope.
Wow.
All right, you can't, of all the things that happen in war, there's some fucked up shit that happens and there's some cool stuff. And that was the coolest thing I think that ever happened to me, to be honest.
Yeah, that's that was my favorite mission, CAS, especially my last assignment, Afghanistan in 2015-16. Some of the missions we were doing with counterinsurgency and yeah,
it was those are definitely my favorite. So the progression of your career as a fighter pilot, is there like a rank that you get to where you're administrative at that point, or do you in that type of bird do you just stay in it for your whole career? Because there's one of the reasons that I had a couple of college degrees before I went in, but I enlisted anyways because as an infantryman, maybe you get to fight as a second lieutenant, but then you're an XO after that, and then maybe you get to fight as a captain, and unless you go to special forces, right? There's the gunfighting days are over for you, and that wasn't really what I signed up for. I didn't want to do that, right? And I've heard, I don't know too much about the Air Force because you guys have, it's different over there. The career paths are quite a bit, or career fields rather, a little bit different. So, what's it like for an F-16 pilot? Can you just stay in that bird your whole career?
You can.
Like I wouldn't imagine there's going to be a general officer flying a fucking sortie somewhere, right?
There are, but it's few and far between, and they're usually command positions, whether they're 1-stars, wing commanders at a base, running a base. They're going to stay just enough competent to be dangerous, and they're always going to have some CNI captain to make sure they don't get themselves in trouble. But
sure.
As far as progression, you typically do stay on the same platform. It's not like back in the 50s and 60s where there was all these different aircraft that they were developing and adding to the inventory. There was, when the F-22 started coming online and the F-35, there was transition. They would take a smattering of different aircraft expertise, whether F-16s, F-15s, the Strike Eagle, the A-10, and kind of figure out, where to pull this talent from to create a cadre of F-35s and F-22s. But more or less, you can stay in the same platform. As far as leadership, it's a balance between what the Air Force needs, your performance and aptitude, and what you want. You can not necessarily game the system, but if there's certain paths you want to take, whether it's stay in the tactical mindset and go to weapons school and be a patch wearer and be the weapons officer of an organization, because that's the most intense training program that we have. Or, you want to you want to stick to flying the entire career, then you won't do those leadership positions. Or if leadership is your gig, you can take those routes, and you might not progress the same way as a more tactical mindset person might do, if that makes any sense.
So explain Top Gun Maverick.
As far as
a 65-year-old captain that's still flying combat.
I dug the movie.
No, it was great. I'm not hating on it. I'm just saying it was a little like there's some Hollywoodification being done there, obviously.
Absolutely. And you have to make it dramatized and cinematic. That's never going to happen as far as that level of, experience or age per se. There are some old hats that stick around for a long time. A lot of them are in the Guard and the reserves because they can. Admire them.
Yeah, why not?
They're well into their 50s flying fighters. I would kill to fly a fighter right now.
If you're in a leadership position like that, like if you let's call it the weapons officer, like subject matter expert for an air wing or something like that, I assume even if you're not if you're not actively assigned to an aircraft flying all the time, you still have to stay current, right? Hours wise, there's got to be some like minimum per quarter or year that you have to fly. Is that right?
Yeah, you're testing my knowledge. It's been about almost 10 years now. But you got to maintain RAP. I don't even know what it stands for, but it's your currency.
Yeah.
And there's so many sorties you got to fly per month. And if you don't, you go on probation, and then you get more focused. Make sure you get it the following month. And so it's just the bottom line. It's you got to maintain some level of currency. To be either combat rated, to be able to deploy and go on these. But if you're long in the tooth and in those leadership positions, you're typically not deploying unless you are actually in charge of the wing at Bagram Air Base, Afghanistan, or Base X, running that organization.
Do you still keep up with, I guess, air combat? Because it's getting, we have a 6th-gen fighter that's on the horizon right now that has a pretty robust AI model on it. I've talked about some of it in the past to people and what some of the features are going to be. Like, essentially, the Blue Force tracker that's immediate and on steroids for an entire battle space is pretty impressive from what I've seen. Some of the simulations I've seen are just absolutely ridiculous. But do you keep up with any of that stuff? Because, the broader U.S. military right now is kind of positioning to move away from the insurgency fight from the GWAT into more of like a preparation for near-peer battle and stuff like that. I mean, special forces squadrons are going to JRTC and shit, right, to show that they can be proficient at just normal infantry stuff again, in the expectation that we might be in some kind of near-peer conflict in the future. You keep track of any of that stuff? And if so, what can you say about the readiness of the U.S. Air Force, Navy, and et cetera? Because we have, I think, 3 of the top 9 air forces in the world, which is nice.
Right. Yeah. I mean, do I keep up? Service level. My focus for the last few years have been space related, but I stay current enough to read a couple articles and keep up on our threats and just watching the progress of China, because those threats are real. I'm glad we're kind of going through this transformation that we are, and kind of refocus our priorities, if you will, throughout the entire government, and certainly the military. I think we're behind the power curve, and we got a long way to go to get caught up. But it's going to be a battle to get back to where we need to be. And it's over, all environments to include space. So, but yeah, I keep up just enough to be, I wouldn't say credible, but dangerous.
Sure. When you got out of the military, what was next for you? Where was your, like, did you get out because it was at 20 and you're like, all right, I've had enough of this shit? Or did you have specific goals in mind? Because usually that makes for a cleaner transition than just maku mushkila and going on about your business?
Yeah, no, it was kind of a family decision. Wife diagnosed with cancer, and we just need to establish ourselves. At the 20-year point in your career, it's like, okay, what's on the horizon? And once you make that transition to 06 to colonel, you have less control of your life, and it's going to be, you're going to go to joint staff jobs, and you're going to go to 1-year remotes, and you have less and less control. And we needed to kind of establish ourselves. We have 3 kids, and so the decision was pretty clear. As far as what I was going to do, coming off of deployment to Bagram, I just had no desire to do the airlines. Just, again, I don't typically do a very traditional path. It's always kind of trailblazing my own journey through life. And I met a buddy of mine back when I was a Thunderbird. His name's Jared Isaacman. Just a very successful entrepreneur. He was starting up a civilian demonstration team of a bunch of old fighter pilots, and so towards the end of my career, when I was the commander of the aggressors, his Black Diamond jet team, civilian air show demo team, he was starting to evolve that into, hey, maybe I can provide a commercial solution for adversary support for the DoD. So he reached out just to pick my brain as the commander of that unit, and so I built a relationship with Jared. And fast forward to when I retired, that concept was actually, developing some momentum with the Air Force. He kind of got a proof of concept contract, and he started a company called Draken International. And he acquired fleets of aircraft that were disbanded by other countries like New Zealand and Czech Republic and France and Spain, and built up this fleet of fighter jets, hired a bunch of old fighter pilots, and started providing the service at a fraction of the cost. And he asked me if I wanted to come, be a part of this organization. So instead of the airlines, I went to work and do business development at Draken. And we built that industry. It was a proof of concept, $6 million, and it grew into it. And now I think it's like a $6 billion industry. We're not involved anymore. But that was kind of my next step. Post-military was doing this contract service for the military. Spent a lot of time doing business development, trying to build these contracts with the various services, with the Air Force, Nellis Air Force Base, where we do most of the training, red flag exercises, and then we started supporting the Navy and the Marines, and we did that for about 5 years. And then we started getting into space. Yeah,
so I mean, the military uses a number of contractors for stuff like that. Robin Sage for Special Forces, the last stage of Special Forces, usually is a bunch of retired infantry dudes that'll come in, that live around Fort Bragg, that'll come in and do OPFOR. The agency has one out west somewhere. I won't say where because it's none of your fucking business, listeners. And the Air Force was obviously, 30 years ago, this probably wouldn't have even been a possibility. But now more commercial aspects to high-speed travel like that, right? And then space as well with SpaceX and Blue Horizon, all this stuff. It's certainly, I mean, just from a political standpoint, if you're into that sort of thing, a private company is designed to be profitable, right? Which means if there's a lot of waste, typically they'll root that shit out on their side. The issue is always with the government contracting side, where they load a bunch of nonsense in there. But I think for like these technologies, people always forget about the second and third order effects, right? So for let's talk about the space program back in the day. There's this idea of science fiction to science fact, like Star Trek gave us iPads and iPhones and GPS and all sorts of other stuff just conceptually. But it was NASA that made it happen, ultimately. Those technologies came from NASA and some of their cohorts. And, with the rapid development of technology and drone and stuff like that, all the stuff that's going on, it seems like we should be doing a lot more when it comes to space. For not just for the primary effect, which is, it's interesting to explore. It's certainly, we shouldn't be a single planet species, because Carl Sagan's been yapped about that for 30 years, up until the 90s when he died, and then some others have picked it up since him. But this idea of putting all of our eggs in one basket seems like a bad idea. And then as we continue, it's the growth of civilization is a balance between finding new territory and being able to get resources to those territories, right? That's kind of the rub, I guess. It's what made, the great empires in human history, and it's what'll make this one eventually. But space is a whole other animal. There's a lot going on up there that we are not prepared for at the moment, like just solar radiation, for example, and being able to fly certain places without getting lit up by radiation. These experiments being done, test flights and all this other shit, super important, man. I just don't know why did we lose? I don't know if you have even an opinion on this, but why did we lose from the 60s and 70s to now? The budget relative to inflation for NASA is pretty much non-existent compared to what it was before. And there's also very little curiosity. Like, there was some blip with the James Webb telescope. And then there's some kind of curious fascination with the Mars stuff because Elon's a lunatic. And people are just like, it takes a lunatic to be able to do that stuff. It's like, this guy really thinks he's going to go to Mars. Good luck. It's like, well, he's going to do it. So what do you think about that? Why is there such a small appetite, both in government and in my opinion, amongst the population for this stuff?
Honestly, I think the appetite's back. It's just a shift of priorities and a shift of focus too. And that's what we've been involved with our collaboration. I don't know how familiar you are with what we were doing, but it was a program called Polaris. And it's very analogous to Project Gemini back in the NASA days. So you got Project Mercury, Mercury 7, just initial space flight in the late 50s, proved that we could get to space. And then you fast forward to the 60s and 70s with the Apollo program, we went to the moon. Well, in between there, with Project Gemini was 12 missions over a course of a 5-year period in the 60s, where they had to figure out a lot of these technological challenges associated with getting to the moon. How are we going to dock vehicles in space? How are we going to do a spacewalk? Long durations, multi-crew. And so that's what the focus of Gemini was. And so that's what, based on our conversations and collaboration with SpaceX, we're like, what challenges are we facing to get back to the moon and eventually Mars and beyond? And so that's kind of how we fashioned our program. And it's a series of up to 3 missions. The first one we did back in September, 5 days. And then mission 2 and mission 3. Mission 3 will be the first human flight of Starship. And our first mission is, again, based on the conversations we had with Elon and SpaceX, it was, what objectives should we focus on for this first mission? And it was like, all right, let's figure out how to do a spacewalk from a commercial vehicle. It's never been done before. It's always been big governments, the ISS. That's been the focus for the last, 20 plus years. Once we made the transition into the shuttle program, it's low Earth orbit, science and research, build a station. Now it's like, okay, this is a big shift. And it's not only a shift in our focus to outside of LEO, it's more of a focus on commercial. And so the objectives we set with Polaris Dawn, our first mission was, let's do the first spacewalk. Oh, by the way, we're going to have to design a brand new EVA suit to do that spacewalk. It's never been done before in over 40 years. And it's a fraction of the budget, that it's not $1 billion project that we can dedicate to these resources. And if we are going to go back to the moon, let's push the envelope in the capabilities of these rocket systems and go to the lower portions of the Van Allen belt and set an altitude record and go further than anyone's been in 50 years since Apollo 17 back in 72. And then our communication. That's going to be one of the biggest challenges when we do these long duration missions. 8 months to get to Mars. the latency and the broadband required to do that, it's got to be lasers or something better, something maybe we haven't conceptualized yet. So we decided, hey, let's test Starlink from space, laser-based communication, for the very first time. And oh, by the way, it's the biggest limb fact is the human body. So we did 40 science and research experiments. So long answer to a short question. I do think we're starting to head back in that direction. In my humble opinion, being led by SpaceX, just based on, you look at the track record and the amount of launches every couple of days, there's something going up, whether it's dispensing, Starlink satellites and creating this enormous mesh constellation. It's going to be a game changer in the way we communicate. We're seeing it now with the ability to, satellite our phones and communicate anywhere in the world with this technology. And it was a game changer up there as far as how we could communicate. A quick story. The idea is we're going to test it on day 4, I think it was, and do this global event. Sarah was a professionally trained violinist. We're going to do this global, musical event. Well, they had us, hey, we're going to turn on your Wi-Fi. And they turned it on immediately. And they're like, we think your Wi-Fi is working. Can we try calling your families? And up to this point, the way you communicate, it's ground stations. You're flying over 17,500 miles an hour, line of sight. It's antiquated. It's not that great. It's delayed. You also have these teacher satellites, geosynchronous satellites you're relying upon. It's high demand national, high value national asset that you're having to, utilize when they have other priorities going on. So bottom line, it's not that great a way to communicate. But when they turned on the Wi-Fi, it's like, I literally grabbed my phone, called my wife. She FaceTimed the kids. We're literally FaceTiming within hours of being on orbit. Here I am. Hey, there's Africa. 5 minutes later, oh, there's India. And it was better connectivity than we have here on Earth. And we have it now. We call this the space station, ISS, and they're like, man, we want that, And so I just think this evolution is going to happen, and it's going to be a very rapid pace in the coming years, if not months.
Yeah, I think we need content. Great science communicators is if we're going to put all this effort into doing this stuff, people who are good communicators who understand the science behind this stuff and the importance of it, social importance of it, is especially out there making, documentaries or whatever the hell. I mean, it's so easy now to create media and publish it. And Elon's got a pretty big platform for that. So he does some stuff well with that regard as far as putting out a lot of information, but I'm still waiting for well-produced, high-quality documentaries on some of this stuff. Because Carl Sagan's Cosmos probably produced as many astronomers as Top Gun did pilots, as Charlie Sheen did Navy SEALs. You know what I mean? This stuff matters. It matters to get the public interest involved in it and explain to them why we're doing this stuff. I think people start to really care about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm so there with you. We did a documentary on our first mission. I was the mission director on it. Jared was the commander on it.
That's Polaris Dawn, right?
Inspiration 4
okay.
was the name of the mission. The Netflix, it's a 5-part series called Countdown.
See, I've never even heard of this. And I'm a science follower, and I've never even heard of this. It's called Countdown?
So it's a wonderfully produced documentary, but it only scratches the surface. So this was a 3-day low Earth orbit, and it was just to kind of prove that anyone could go to space. It was the first all-civilian mission to space. Really fun project we were part of. We're in the process of producing, or they are. They've been covering us for the last 3 years, training for this mission, and it was very intense training for the last 3 years. Involved NASA, to develop a brand new spacesuit. And to go through the training that we did to be able to do the first commercial spacewalk and go higher than anyone's gone. We set an altitude record for Earth orbit and to test Starlink. So that is on the horizon, whether they're going to release it as a one show based on Polaris Dawn, or they're going to wait and capture mission 2 and 3. That's all TBD.
Yeah, that's
but yeah,
great.
I'm totally with you. We need more content. We need more, it's just within the industry, there's a lot, but it hasn't, crest where it needs to be with the general public. Yeah.
Well, maybe we need to link up sometime and get some real Hollywood folks involved in all of this. I know Tom Cruise wants to shoot something from space, but that's something altogether different, right? I mean, that'll be cool.
Yes, he does.
That will be cool. I don't think they can even. I think they have to wait for a window, so it's going to be some amount of years before it can even happen. People, that's another thing that people have a hard time. Our brains just didn't evolve to process time the way that it actually happens in space. You know what I mean? Space is very vast, and there might be 1 or 2 windows a year to be able to do certain things. Maybe 1 window every 2 or 3 years, right? Depending. I've got some other questions. You mentioned an upgraded spacesuit a couple times. Can you tell me the difference between the older model and what's going on now?
Yeah, so that was one of the coolest aspects of this project and that was the long pole in the tent as far as our timeline, because we were supposed to launch a year and a half prior to than when we actually did. But with this being a developmental mission, similar to what Gemini went through, they took the baseline IVA suit, intravehicular activity. It's the spacesuit they wear to and from on the Dragon capsule to get to the ISS. Keeps them alive. In case of a depressurization, it's you can pressurize it and just stay alive. But they're just going to and from. It's a quick trip. We were going to bring the entire capsule down to vacuum because we don't have an airlock. So, and we were going to, do a spacewalk, go outside the capsule. So you got to deal with the thermals and the intent to pressurize because you're at vacuum. So they took that baseline suit to develop this first prototype EVA suit, extravehicular activity. And so the idea behind the development of this suit, just amazing. The smartest engineers I've ever met working at SpaceX. And they're like 25, 26, 27 years old working on this. It's insane, that organization. And it's a very cool building at the headquarters. But to watch them day in and day out, I mean, they're so passionate. And, it was almost like Monster Garage. So they would take this suit and they would patch with different types of sleeves and bearings and different elements to it. We would test out, we would give some feedback. We would leave on Friday and then come back on a Monday. And the dude had tinkered something in the garage to try something new. And this went on for a 3-year period. And the end result was phenomenal. It was extremely comfortable. Because the big elements you had to worry about for our mission was pressurization. Obviously, we're going to be at vacuum, so we have to have some type of adequate mobility. So they had actually designed, their team designed these very novel, innovative technology for these certain bearings to be able to, rotate the wrists and the shoulder. So it's very pliable and you can function when it's not pressurized. But once it's pressurized, you still have the mobility to do what you need to do inside the capsule. Other elements is thermal consideration. So our suit was umbilical fed, so we're attached to the vehicle, just like old school Gemini days. There will be new iterations of this that will make it more of an independent suit like the EMUs they have on the space station. But for all intents and purposes, to get us through our mission, this was umbilical fed. So we're getting cooling. We're getting oxygen, nitrogen, nitrox fed into our suits to keep us cool. And so they had to design, the suit had like 12 layers, because when you talk about the temperatures, in the sun and in the eclipse of the planet, it's a plus or minus 250 degrees. So it's a pretty significant swing. Even the short durations that were outside the capsule. And then they developed some avionics for the suit itself. that provided some critical metrics for us: the pressure of the suit, temperature of the suit, durations. Just it's almost like a monocle that we might have on NVGs, or in flying the world, it's RJ helmets. Mm-hmm. So
you got a heads-up display in your spacesuit, basically.
We have a heads-up display in our spacesuit. I was looking for a reticle laser designator so I could pew pew.
Yeah, wouldn't that be dope?
But they're not ready for that.
No, not yet. They will be. Speaking of ready for that, just the fact that Wi-Fi is working in space, we are now capable as a species of prank calling people from space. You know what I mean? And there's no way I wouldn't do that. I would do that every single. That's all I would do. I would never get any work done. I would just be talking shit to people. To be honest. Like, hey, what are you doing today? Oh, I'm in space, you bitch, and it's hang up on.
I can't deny the fact that maybe I sent a couple texts, but our focus was science and research.
Sure,
and
yeah, of course.
Very adamant about, dude, you have 40 science and research experiments. We got to get we got to get as much as we possibly can to meet the mission objectives. But I can't say there wasn't an urge to send out a couple texts or even make some phone calls. The capability's there. It's insane.
Just wait until there are Marines up there. It's going to get bad. It's going to get bad. I won't get graphic on this show because it's not what this show is about, but it's going to get bad when Marines are up there with all this technology. I can say that. So it was just September for Polaris Dawn, and one of the things that you mentioned it, but one of the tests was kind of venturing into the Van Allen radiation belt and seeing what the effects of human beings would be on that, given the current state of technology. Do you have findings from that yet, or is it too early for that?
So we're getting the first wave of information download, mainly the science and research and all the experiments we did on the body in April. So they've been consolidating and collecting all this data. As far as what we experienced, and this was part of the mission design, we ended up with a very highly elliptical orbit. So the furthest you get away is called the apogee, and the closest you pass is called the perigee. Our apogee was 1,408 kilometers. To put that in perspective, the ISS, it's at 400-ish kilometers. So we went an extra 1,000 kilometers past that. And for Earth orbit, altitude record was Gemini 11 back in 1966. Pete Conrad and Dick Gordon went up to 1368. So we wanted to kind of eclipse that record. So we ended up at 1,408 kilometers. And then, but the perigee, the backside of that orbit, was down to around 190 kilometers, I think it was. And the reason why I share that, it's to minimize our exposure in the lower portions of the Van Allen belt for that radiation considerations. And based on the modeling that they did, we were anticipating some impacts to hardware, but there's so much redundancy, and based on the modeling, they didn't think it was going to be much of an impact, and it wasn't. We had a couple resets, no big deal. And then I think it was the equivalent, I've already forgot the number, but I think it was something like the equivalent of spending 6 months on the ISS as far as the radiation exposure that we were going to experience. I think that was the number. I could be wrong, but it wasn't enough to be impactful. No, I didn't see any aliens. There was no yeah.
Well, the tech that we're going to have to develop to handle this, if we're going to become interplanetary as a species, is pretty interesting, because your brain goes to lead shielding and stuff like that, but it turns out that polyethylene and plastics do a better job of shielding against cosmic radiation than metal does, right? Metal absorbs that stuff, and in a lot of ways lets it pass directly through. I guess it would be akin to certain chemicals that won't corrode plastic versus metal. It'll just go right through metal, right? Is that something that you guys are working on, or is that different companies that are working on, different types of polymers and such to block against this stuff?
I know SpaceX is working on it. It wasn't part of our privy. or any of our focus. We got to get through the Van Allen belts. So there's going to be some intense radiation along the way, and the longer you hang out there, the more exposure you have. And then the environment of space is very intense. And your body goes through this transition. It's not just the radiation, it's everything else. I mean, our species are built for 1G. We're used to gravity. We're used to using our skeletal system, our muscles, our tendons, our ligaments. Up there, it's all about not using any of that. And in fact, you initially, when you get up there, it's with zero gravity, you're moving around way too much, and you end up bouncing off walls, and you almost have to learn this meditative hovering technique. And it's the lack of use of muscles and ligaments and tendons, and it's almost this atrophy that you have to deal with. Not only that, it's this fluid shifting that happens in the body, and it's like they call it brain lift. Your brain literally lifts inside the skull, and there's initial transitions you have to deal with: space adaptation syndrome, the space motion sickness, this disorientation that you experience when you're positive G's on the way up, and then you get to zero gravity, and this cross-coupling illusion that you experience, and it's just and when you're in that environment, you're forced to adapt. There's no, the ride doesn't end in 30 seconds on a roller coaster, like a roller coaster. You have to deal with the circumstances, and it can have a big impact on astronauts. And so just dealing with all of that, to include the radiation. Back to my original point, it's like the body is going to be the biggest limitation when we talk about long duration missions.
We're going to have to get really clever. I mean, certainly we're going to need some extremely, well, this is my opinion, but I think we're going to need some extremely large starship that has I guess a fixed center with a rotational outer part that's creating gravity probably, and also maybe creating an electromagnetism that's shielded, because that's the thing that shields the world, the Earth that you live on, from all this cosmic radiation, is the electromagnetic field produced by the spinning of the Earth's core and the spinning of the Earth. We're going to have to find a way to replicate that probably. I mean, that's the way that nature has solved the problem, so it's probably how we should solve the problem, but getting to that point is something altogether different, right? I mean, we've tried to recreate nature before, and we're making strides. I mean, certainly with the Large Hadron Collider, with the Japanese program where they're recreating the conditions of the sun and stuff like this. Like we're making a lot of progress in this regard, but the space program was just completely shut down for so long that we're playing serious catch up now. And I think had we kept our foot on the gas, we probably would be there, or quite certainly would be closer, but I think we would be there. Especially with the commercial endeavors that have happened over the last 20 years or so. What do you think the next milestone for us in space is going to be? It's certainly not. We're not putting people on Mars next year, right? But what's the next big milestone that you guys are anticipating?
Well, I mean, POTUS and Elon, and their quest is to get to the moon in the next 2 years, and eventually Mars in 4. Those are pretty lofty goals. I think obviously the moon and whatever happens with the Artemis program, I still think the quest is to get back to the lunar surface and get out of LEO. I think that's the focus. There's obviously benefit to capitalizing on LEO, whether that's stations to do research, because, I can't poo-poo everything that we've done over the last couple decades, because there's been a ton of science and research that have benefited life here on Earth, and some of the innovative technologies they've been able to develop. But we're certainly making this shift, and there's now more of an interest and curiosity to get out there and explore. And I believe that's, my buddy Jared, who's been recently nominated to run NASA, and that's his goal, is to support this transformational mindset that we have, to throughout the entire government and country. And I think, we will pursue those goals of getting back to the lunar surface and Mars. So I think that is the focus. Personal opinion, I think Starship is going to be a focus with what SpaceX is doing. And, they'll continue to develop this technology. And I've seen it firsthand. You go to Starbase down in Boca Chica, down in Texas, and they've got these rockets lined up, ready for testing and developing. And their mentality is fail fast. Let's blow these up. Let's learn from them, make some tweaks and changes, and press on. It's bureaucracy that's slowing down the progress.
It always is, yeah. I mean, there's a number of hurdles that we're going to have to face just from an engineering standpoint. One is reusability. Obviously, Elon's getting pretty good at that now. I mean, it's obviously not perfect, but he's done things in the last 3 years that no one's ever imagined would be possible. It's one of the reasons that we stopped funding the space program, to be honest, is because of those challenges. And then, of course, putting exit velocity for our primary mission in the past is going to be a thing. Building crafts in space, so we don't have to deal with that bullshit. So we don't have to get something up to 25,000 miles per hour every time we want to do anything. And these are challenges that have always existed. And there are people who look at it as an impossible challenge and just say, oh, well, we can't do that. That's not something that we're capable of doing. And there's people like Elon and Isaacman who don't give a fuck about what we can and can't do. They find a way to do it. So, leadership matters. We're seeing it with the dramatic changes over the past 3 or 4 weeks, to be honest. But if we want to get serious about technology and space, we need a strong leader at the helm of our space program. You mentioned Jared Isaacman a few times. He's been nominated as the next NASA administrator, and you've worked with him for some time now, so you know this dude pretty well. He's an interesting fella. He's in some ways kind of like like Elon light, right? Because he came from payment processing and decided to get into he went more on the I'm actively gonna fly some shit versus I'm just going to engineer some shit. So he's kind of like the engineer. I'm sorry, he's kind of like the pilot version of Elon. So Elon's over here engineering, he's over here flying stuff. Tell me about Isaacman and what he's like his, I guess, transition from entrepreneur into this field, because he's nobody has heard of this guy in any meaningful way unless you're really close on some of this stuff. But he's made progress. I mean, you guys were the first commercial space flight to do a walk. I think you're the first one to do 4 people on a walk at the same time. There's all sorts of stuff that's happened, and I don't think the general public know much about it.
Right. And I saw it early on. The dude is a visionary, just like Elon. He's like, well, first off, his intellect is off the charts, but in these discussions, whether it's flying the fighter jets or developing the space mission, he's thinking on so many different levels. And it's just his ability to process all this information and stay focused on the mission at hand. And I saw that very early on with the Inspiration 4. It was like when that opportunity came about, it could have gone many directions. But he was very focused on, hey, if we're going to do this, it's got to be meaningful. The objective is to kind of begin this next chapter in space exploration. So what's inevitable is making it available to any and all humans. So let's do the first let's do the first all civilian mission, and let's prove that anyone can go to space. So that's why we randomly, instead of picking his buddies to go with him, we randomly selected his crew. And oh, by the way, let's continue to focus on improving life here on Earth. So that's why we partnered with St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, and because he believed in what their mission was and what they're doing to support and try to eradicate cancer. And he just stayed so focused. There was plenty of times we could have been, the train could have easily come off the tracks. But he's like, no, this is the mission. This is the objective. And it's very successful. We raised $250 million and supported St. Jude. The mission was very successful. And that was the catalyst for this follow-on program, which is, all right, we proved that. What's the next step? And now it's like, okay, we're going to push the envelope. This is a developmental mission. This is all the behind the scenes kind of, we got to solve a lot of these big challenges. Again, with this vision of going back to the lunar surface and eventually Mars. What do we need to solve? Well, if there's going to be hundreds, if not thousands of people bouncing around on the surface of the moon, we got to develop a spacesuit. And we can't rely upon, the half dozen EMU suits that exist at NASA. And it can't cost billions of dollars. This needs to be something that is cost effective and can handle the capacity. And so that just, is an indication of who he is as an individual, where his focus is at, where his passions are at. As far as his credibility, man, there's not many, if there is anyone at all that is not military trained in a fighter jet, well, that I would fly that close with. So to fly a couple feet apart in fighter jets, flying formation, close proximity to the ground, like we would do, he is one of one. Other than, people who have the military background that had that opportunity. And it's because he has humility and self-awareness in his capabilities. Keep him grounded. He's always focused on safety. And so that just makes him a very credible pilot, astronaut. And he was tireless throughout that entire program with Polaris. There's a lot of smart engineers in the room who have astrophysics or aeronautical engineering degrees and aerospace engineering degrees. And he's right there with them, crunching the numbers, validating, the fault tolerances and the safety measures to ensure, 100% mission success, because he repeated it constantly. We could not afford to fail in this mission because it would set the entire space exploration industry back years if we fail. Yeah.
So for the future, for you guys, I mean, if he's a NASA administrator, he can't keep going to space. Obviously, you got work to do down here, brother. I hate to break it to you, but those are the perils of command, I suppose. But what about you? Are you going back?
Oh no, I'm 50. What am I? 51 now. I'm going to do some speaking, hang with the kids. I got teenagers, a couple still in high school. Focus is family right now.
Sure. I mean, not to talk shit or anything, but I think didn't William Shatner go to space at 90? I guess it was the Blue Origin. They just kind of like go up and right back down, so it's different, I guess.
It's still advancing the needle. Anything that goes outside of the Armstrong line is helping, helping the cause for sure.
Do you think that
I think John Glenn went up when he was in the 80s?
Yeah, he did. So. Yeah, he went back up. Do you think there's in addition to, exploring and populating other bodies, whether they're moons or planets, and just general starcraft and exploration, do you anticipate actual commercial space travel at some point, like in the next 50, 100 years, where there's some community on the moon that you can pay enough money to fly to and hang out for a couple of weeks and come back?
100%. I am Kool-Aid drinking. If you asked me 5 years ago, when I was barely tracking what was going on in space and seeing what I've seen at this point, 100%. I believe that Elon's vision of launching a couple of these starships on a daily basis, whether they're going to go to low Earth orbit, whether they're going to dock with something en route to the moon, that is our future. As long as we as a populace want to set that as a overall milestone and objective, it's going to happen. I mean, just look at the chopsticks. I mean, the fact that he's catching this is the largest rocket ever built. It's bigger than Saturn V. Took astronauts to the moon. And, the concept is that there's going to be 100 plus passengers on these vehicles, the Starship. And it certainly can house them. I mean, I've seen the prototypes. We've been into the prototypes as far as what the living accommodations would look like and the volume. And it's enormous. It's crazy. It's like you look at the capsules from Gemini and the Apollo and how tight they are. It's insane that they were there for hours, let alone days on some of those missions. And then you look at the volume that we went into. I think it's about 14 feet in diameter. It was enough to live for 5 days. Much more than that, it's going to be a challenge. And now you talk about Starship. That thing is enormous. And it's going to be, you're going to have an air crew, or space crew. It's going to be responsible for operating the vehicle, but then there's going to be all that extra volume to bring those passengers, to have this sci-fi image of us jumping up and down on another planet.
Yeah, it's we've got plenty of progress to make, I guess. But the only thing standing in the way is will at this point. It's just about getting out there and doing stuff. And last question on this: do you have any idea what's going on with the ISS in the future? Are they decommissioning that thing, or are we going to rebuild a new one, or what's going on with that? Because I hear a lot of different things.
Yeah, just what's in the news. I don't have any inside scoop on what the intent is. It's got its obviously benefits of what they've been able to evolve and develop over the years. Tons of science and research have come out of that vehicle. It's antiquated. Obviously, we got to do something if we want to kind of take us into this next chapter of exploration, whether that is a build upon this vehicle or decommission it and bring it on home, or you look at the volume of, I hate to stand on the soapbox of SpaceX, but you look at Starship. One Starship is the same volume as the space station. Now you launch a couple of these and dock them together, and now you have this enormous volume of a new station, if you will. So who knows what they end up doing with it? There's so many other companies out there that are developing technology to create these inhabitable structures in space. I think once the ball gets rolling and we have these service providers that have the launch capability to get things to low Earth orbit, it's just a matter of like a little checks and balances of how we manage all this. Is NASA become the new FAA of space and manage all this, or we'll see. Yeah,
there's that's the most likely outcome, and it's the outcome that should happen. You mentioned bureaucracy and such. It's for technological advancement, bureaucracy. One, it slows things down, but one of the really negative second order effects of bureaucracy is that you get middle ground technology that shouldn't need to exist, right? Like, because we can't move as fast as we need to create this thing as a stopgap before we get to the full thing we're going to create. And then you stay at the stopgap for 20 years. Like, oh, that's good enough, right? It's not good enough for this. This technological advancement needs to happen rapidly and, as you say, break things fast. So I'm glad that Jared is in the running for this. I don't see any issues with him getting confirmed. It's just a matter of time as a priority. But certainly appreciate you coming on the show and getting the word out about this and the operations you guys are doing. They're very interesting to me. I'm a big fan of space and
I can tell.
Yeah, and astrophysics in general. I'm a bit of a nerd when this, like, some of my very dear friends like Brian Keating are astrophysicists. So I talk to them on a regular basis. I bother that man all the time, just like ask. I get crazy ideas at night. I'm like, hey, does this work? What about this? And he'd like paragraphs of him explaining to me why I'm stupid. But I love it. I really do enjoy it, and hopefully we can bring some of that, through the accomplishment. I think it brings some passion back for the sciences, for STEM in general, and for space travel and such. To the ordinary population, general population. So I'm glad that you guys are out there doing that stuff. Tell everybody where they can find you and all your work, should they want to check into this. And also about that documentary on Netflix, because I'm going to be watching that.
Yeah, the documentary is called Countdown, 5-part series. That covers inspiration for that first mission. They haven't produced the latest documentary for our Polaris, but the Polaris program in general is polarisprogram.com. But otherwise, social media handles, kitpoteet.com, myself.
Awesome. Yeah. Check that out. Check out the documentary It's Countdown, Inspiration for Mission to Space.
Elon's on the cover. It's on Netflix.
Yeah. I'll be watching that tonight. Actually, I have nothing to do tonight. So I appreciate you coming today. If you're out there, go do your own homework. Watch the documentary. Check into Scott Poteet. Check into Jared, and see, what they've been up to, what they're going to be up to, and I think it's fascinating what you guys are doing. I really appreciate you coming on the show today.
Absolutely appreciate the opportunity, brother.
Yes, sir. And thank you all for listening. This has been Citizen.